straightforward as to define exactly what it is a curator does. But in a nutshell, the primary job of a curator is to look after, care for and manage a museum collection.
Excellent, thank you. Daniel, have you got anything to add to that?
No, I think that's pretty accurate. I guess maybe the only thing I would say is, in addition to looking after and caring for the existing collection on site, at least at the Smithsonian Institution, the way curator is defined, is also responsible for acquisitions into the collection, as well as occasionally deaccessioning from the collection, exhibitions, a lot of exhibition work involved in being a curator, and also kind of being the public face of the collection through giving talks like this, in our field, Philatelic, going to shows, but academic conferences and things like that. So also kind of being a de facto representative or spokesperson for the collection.
Excellent, thank you. And Daniel, first of all, can you explain how you got into the role of curator?
I stumbled into it. I've been a stamp collector since I was young. Since time out of mind, I don't really. Well, I guess actually my stamp collecting career started in a museum, in a children's museum. My grandmother bought me a stamp collecting kit. So maybe I was always destined to come back to finish stamp collecting in a museum, you know. But I was pursuing an academic career, getting my master's degree in history at Syracuse University, preparing to teach. I was not preparing for a career in the museum field at all. And at that time, the Smithsonian advertised for a chair of research at the Postal Museum. And I said, well, that sounds like fun. I'll send in an application. They'll never hire me, but just to say I applied for the job, you know. And no one was more surprised maybe than me that they hired me. That was in 2007, and I've been here ever since. So it's not, a career in museums was not anything I set out to do or to have.
And your roles kind of evolved during your time with the museum over the years?
Right. So I was hired first as what we call the chair of research, facilitating both internal research by the conservators and the curators, but also external researchers coming in and using the collection. I did that for about a year or so. And then the curator of Philatelic at that time was Cheryl Gans, who was well known in the philatelic field. And after I was at the museum about a year, she had a vacancy for an assistant curator, and then hired me from the research role into being the assistant curator. And when she retired in 2014, then the museum hired me into her former position. So I've been hired 3 times without ever leaving the building. Kind of strange, but it's the way it works.
Excellent. And come to Chris, could you explain how you got to where you are today?
Yes, so some similarities actually, certainly in the sort of latter part of my career with what Dan was saying. I did a degree in history at the University of London, and always knew I wanted to work in the museum profession. So unlike Dan, I decided that museums were where I wanted to go for quite a long time. And I went on and did a postgraduate degree, master's degree in museum studies at the University of Leicester. And in 2001 started at what is today the Postal Museum in London on a 6-month contract for a cataloguing job, cataloguing the collections. That got extended to a year's contract, and then during that time a vacancy came up for an assistant curator. So I applied for that and got that position, and then have ended up staying at the Postal Museum for the past 21 years. Working through different jobs, exactly like Dan had just said, you know, without ever leaving the building, applying for different roles. So I started as assistant curator, became curator, and then senior curator, and then we had a restructure within the team, and we combined previously the archive department, the philatelic department, and the museum collection department were 3 separate teams. And in 2013, I think it was, we merged those 3 teams together under a single role of head of collections, which is the role that that I got then and I'm still in Postal now. So yeah, it was a sort of evolution. I certainly, in 2001, when I arrived on a 6-month contract, I didn't imagine 21 years later I would be still in the organisation. It's a very different organisation because back then we didn't have the Postal Museum that we've got today that only opened relatively recently in 2017. So.
Okay, thank you. Obviously, COVID had a big impact on museums and other institutions around the world. How are the museums dealing with the aftermath of COVID? Daniel, would you like to go first?
The way museums deal with the aftermath of everything, that is, we're collecting it. So to make sure that it's, represented in the collection for exhibition and research purposes for future generations. So it was, I'm sure Chris had a similar experience. It was very difficult. I mean, our museum was closed to the public for a number of months, reopened again briefly, and then Washington, D.C. experienced a real spike and a surge and had to close again. So we were closed and opened and closed again. The staff were working from home almost completely for 2 years. It's somewhat discouraging to be a curator of a collection when you can't be with the collection and have access to the library and so forth. So it was challenging. A lot of administrative sort of stuff got done during those 2 years, things like coming up with a new collections plan and updating the website, making digital sort of content. I've been back in the building basically full time since about May, because I enjoy being near the collection and with the library and able to do research for exhibits and answer public inquiries. I sort of need those resources. And now really building a plan for, the stamps that were issued during COVID, the mail, and in the U.S., we had the added dimension of COVID necessitated a whole election that was conducted by mail basically in 2020, which was very controversial. So collecting ballots and material related to that. So that's how museums deal with everything, I guess, as well. It's something new to collect now, to make sure we have a COVID and a vote by mail collection, so that in the future, people wanting to do exhibits and researchers wanting to understand this period and what was going on, will have the Postal Museum as a resource.
Fantastic. Chris, anything to add?
Yeah, not dissimilar experience really. I mean, collecting the story is one thing we did very early on during COVID. We immediately began. We recognised how important the postal system was to communication during the pandemic and to keeping people in touch and in contact during the pandemic. People were separated by lockdowns, children separated from grandparents and things. Saw an increase in letter writing, people sending postcards, and a whole range of products being developed around the subject matter of the pandemic and of lockdown. So we wanted to collect that. We also wanted to collect the experience of the postal workers who were frontline workers, who were considered to be emergency workers during the pandemics because they had to carry on and do their job. But also the way people turned to the post to reflect on the pandemic, and there began this kind of tradition in Britain of these postbox toppers being added, these knitted hats, if you like, being added to pillar boxes in the UK, and they've taken off in an incredible way. And so people turned to, I think, familiar things in a way during the pandemic. From the museum's point of view, like Dan said, with his museum, we had to close, of course, as everywhere did. As a charge for museum, that was a very serious thing for us. We didn't have a core part of our income. A huge amount of our income comes from visitors buying tickets. We're an independent museum. So, of course, it was a very difficult time. I'm very pleased that we managed to get through that time unscathed, largely. We were one of the few museums in London who didn't have to make a single redundancy during that period, which is incredible. And as an executive team, of which I'm part, we worked really, really hard to keep the museum going, to look after collections. I was driving in, because everyone was locked down, I was driving into the museum a couple of times a week to check on the collection, make sure there was no leaks had sprung or anything like that, because the building was locked down. So I was going in and was often the only person wandering around the building on my own checking on the collections because other people weren't allowed to travel. And we had to keep them going and keep staff employed where we could, find alternative work for people because people were working from home and people couldn't do necessarily their ordinary jobs. And then we had to work through a number of different scenarios to get the museum back up and running and work out how we were going to operate under the new rules. And post-lockdown we had very tight rules about social distancing and one-way routes. We had to redesign the route visitors took around the museum, introduce protective measures and things. So it was a very difficult time for everybody, and a lot of our colleagues were on furlough, so basically not working and being paid. So we had a very difficult time keeping on top of everything that was going on and keeping managing the welfare of our well-being of our colleagues as well. So, and then as we moved out of the immediate lockdown of COVID, planning for our future and our rebuilding, and we're still in that rebuilding stage. We are, we're not back to where we were in terms of visitor numbers, for example, pre 2020, pre end of 2019. And as a relatively new museum, we opened in 2017. 2020, we were forced to close for the vast majority of the year before opening and closing again. And so we're now just getting back and building back up to somewhere close to where we were in 2019.
Both museums organise numerous events and displays throughout the year. How do you decide on what aspects of the collections you want to showcase? Chris, would you like to go first?
We have a content development plan. So one of my curators, my senior curator, oversees and manages our content development plan. So we have set out a plan for what stories we want to tell, what stories we think people are interested in, sometimes driven by national events or commemorations or centenaries or anniversaries, sometimes driven by the research that we do and the new stories we're uncovering. Our content plan is constantly changing and evolving, and we had a really, really strong, clear plan which we developed during 2018, early 2019, which is going to take us for the next few years. And of course, for reasons just discussed with COVID, that literally went out the window. And some of you may be aware we had an exhibition plan to mark the 150th anniversary of the first British postcard, which was meant to mark the 150th anniversary. It marked the 151st anniversary of the first British postcard because we were closed for most of the 150th anniversary. So that was our previous exhibition. Our current exhibition is on the history of development of postcodes in Britain, sorting Britain. So yeah, we look at what's going on, we look at what's interesting people are in, and we draw on the research that our curators and archivists are doing.
Daniel, would you like to go next?
Well, my current exhibition at the museum opened in April. It's called Baseball, America's Home Run. And that started, more. And again, I stumbled into that one too. Just a chance discovery that the Postal Museum here in Washington is actually built on the site of one of Washington, D.C.'s earliest ball fields. There was a National League ball field here from 1886 to 1889 that was then demolished to build Union Station, the train station next door, and the city post office, which is the building that we're in now. And that just got me sort of thinking about baseball and philately and the connections to all the stamps that were issued. The building has a physical connection to baseball history. The collection has a kind of a content connection, more than 60 U.S. baseball themed stamps. And it just sort of, grew from there. So sometimes ideas just are a chance discovery or spring out of a seemingly random fact. But then other exhibits that I've done, like in 2016, I did an exhibit for the centennial of the U.S. National Parks, showing mail and stamps related to the national parks, and that was very much inspired by the centennial. So, yeah, it's a mix of, as Chris says, anniversaries and research-driven topics, and then some of the very fun ones are the ones you just kind of stumble into it. I could do an exhibit about that, and it percolates for a while. And these ideas take a long time to sort of germinate and be developed. Select your objects and write the script and so forth. It takes years to develop what may look like a fairly small temporary exhibition. They're years in the making.
Fantastic. Chris, is probably more geared towards you. How have attractions such as Mail Rail helped the general public learn more about the history of the Post?
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, Mail Rail, the Postal Underground Railway, which is a major part of the attraction at the Postal Museum here in London. Mail Rail was, throughout its history, simply an operational tool of the Postal Service. It was simply something the Post was used to move and speed the movement of mail across the capital. It was never really intended to sort of show or exhibit in any way. It certainly wasn't built for that. However, when we were developing the concept of the Postal Museum, we recognised that there was an interest in there. There had always been a lot of questions about it. So we found a way of providing access to it and allowing people to actually ride on part of the former railway. And it's been an incredibly important hook to get visitors to the museum. So I think, the underground train ride, and it is a ride, it is a sort of amusement type ride, was very important. It's very important for us in terms of bringing people in and then showing them what else there is to the story of postal communication. So, we definitely get a broader range of an audience on the back of having the railway. And then, of course, we tell them about the railway, how it works, what it did, why it was important. And then, by extension, people then visit the main museum and learn the much broader 500-year story of the UK Postal Service.
Fantastic. So it's Daniel, that's kind of the beauty of something like your baseball exhibition. It's appealing to a wider audience.
Right.
Fantastic. Okay. Daniel, to you first. Do the museums have close ties? If so, how do they work together?
Yes, I think so. I think we've had close ties for a number of years. I mean, I know all the curators over there. I think they all know me. At this point, we're in contact with each other by email. We've never done a joint exhibition or anything like that, which is something I'd like to do. Maybe at some point in the future, develop something that can be shown in London and Washington. That type of a deal. But the last time I was over there was for the opening in 2017. Several of us came over for that. And I know we've had delegations from the Postal Museum in London have come and visited us at our shop in Washington too. So we all know each other and are in communication and contact. We haven't maybe done a lot in the way of going towards now a joint project. But I could definitely see that in the future.
Chris, anything to add?
I could agree with all that. Obviously, I visited the Smithsonian National Postal Museum in about October-November 2019, I think it was. So just before we ended up in the COVID situation, but it was an unheard of thing at that time. But yeah, so visited, and as Dan says, we met a few times online. We exchanged emails from time to time. Stay in contact, and at some point doing a joint exhibition, we've sort of mooted the idea a couple of times, but it never quite happened. But yeah, it's something we'd be keen to do together.
Yeah, when you think about it, Philatelic Curators. How many of us are there in the world? 2-3 dozen?
Yeah, there's not many.
We all kind of know each other to some extent, right?
Absolutely, and there are international associations and things. I recently just come back from Prague at the International Association of Transport and Communication Museums, which brings together colleagues from around the world, from different, it's dominated by the transport museums to an extent, but there's a lot of representatives from communication museums as well. So yeah, we've just come back from that annual conference.
You touched on this a little bit with the COVID material, but as the role of the museum is to protect the history of the Post, do you work closely with your respective postal operators in order to archive modern day material? Daniel, would you like to go first?
Yes. In the first place, a large part of our operating budget is provided by the United States Postal Service through a grant to the Smithsonian Institution. They're a big supporter of the museums, and the Postmaster General is on the museum's coordinating committee with the Secretary of the Smithsonian Institution and a number of other officials. So there are close ties with the Postal Service that way. What the museum does is serve as a repository for what's known as the Postmaster General's collection. And the Postmaster General's collection is the official archival repository of original artwork commissioned for postage stamps, of the proofs and the press sheets, the certified proofs which are signed off on before going to press with the stamps. So all of that developmental and archival material for modern United States postage stamps comes here to the National Postal Museum, and we use it in our exhibitions. There's a lot of it in the baseball exhibit, press sheets for the Legends of Baseball stamps and the Major League All-Star stamp series and so forth. Original archival artwork and proofs and press sheets that the public have never seen before. So we use a lot of that in our exhibits. We bring it to stamp shows occasionally, put a lot of it online. So we're the repository for that collection.
Chris?
Yeah, we work very closely with Royal Mail and Post Office Limited, obviously. We are an independent charity, so we're not run by or controlled by or employed by them in any way. We are completely independent. However, obviously, we draw a lot of our stories and our collection from them. We, like Dan, we are the repository of the UK Post Administration, so Royal Mail and Post Office Limited jointly have responsibility for a public record collection, national collection of business archives, which includes a stamp collection and business archive going right back to the 1630s. And that's a public record, so by law the postal administrations have to look after and safeguard that collection, provide access to it. And the way they do that is they pay us to do that for them. So we look after the archive, manage the archive, provide the access to it, undertake conservation on it, and display material from it. And so we manage that collection for them in return for an annual fee, essentially. So they meet their legal obligations through us managing that archive for them. So it's a service we provide to the business. And we, just like Dan, we get new material in, we get the artwork, the stamp artwork, the designs, we get files, project files, and then increasingly digital material coming into the collections being generated by the businesses. On top of that, we also have the museum's own collection. So we have the archive and most of the Philatelic collection is part of that public record, publicly owned archive. But then we have material that forms part of what we call the museum collection, which is material that isn't part of the archive. It isn't officially produced by the Postal Service, the UK Postal Service, but reflects the history of the Postal Service, or is non-archival material, such as postal vehicles, pillar boxes, machinery, equipment from sorting offices and post offices. So we have two collections really. We have that publicly owned collection which doesn't belong to us, and then we have the collection that does belong to us.
Yeah, we have a similar division, those two separate collections, except in our case, because the Smithsonian Institution is the national museum, both halves of our collection are publicly owned, both held in public trust.
Right. And how can collectors and research access material in your archives? Daniel first?
A number of ways. We provide access to the collection. As first and foremost, the signature way we provide access is through our on-site exhibitions. Between 20 and 30,000 pieces from the museum's permanent collection are always, sort of on public display in the galleries, 7 days a week, 364 days a year. So that's one way. We also do traveling shows and loans to other institutions, primarily stamp shows around the country and some internationally as well. So we bring material kind of to collectors that way. But then anything that's in the museum's collection, you can make an appointment, and there's a whole website, the whole page on our website online with the contact information of who to contact to make a research appointment to come in and see what we have. We do have the second largest collection at the Smithsonian Institution, and so the Postal Museum is 30 years old, was opened in 1993, but the Smithsonian's Philatelic collections are much, much older than that. The Smithsonian started collecting stamps and postal objects in the 1880s. So our collection has grown over the last 130, 40 years. And not everything is cataloged or digitized. That's a very expensive and time-consuming process. We do quite a bit of it each year, but with 6 million pieces, it's going to take a long time to get everything into a database or online. And so in the meantime, what fills the gap, and one of the reasons maybe the curators like Chris and myself have such longevity in our jobs, is you build up institutional knowledge of the holdings and the collections. So really, you can find stuff on the website, make an appointment that way, but there may be other material that's not online that we don't have a finding aid to yet, or that's not in the online database. And so it's talk to a curator beforehand, because I'll tell you, this collection here, that collection there, no one's looked at this. You should come and see that. So it always helps to have a sort of a personal contact. And I'm sure you'll. And by all means, share my contact information with the attendees there.
Same sort of thing for you, Chris?
Yeah, very similar. I mean, we've got, first and foremost, our public galleries, our museum. People can come visit here in London. We have an archive reading room, essentially, where people can come and access original documents from the archive. It doesn't necessarily need an appointment to do that. You can just come in during the opening hours of the archive. But we do encourage people to make an appointment if you can, and it just helps us help you by getting material ready for you in advance of things, for example. And then, making appointments to see certain collections. So most of the collection, the archive collection is generally freely available. The Philatelic collections requires appointments to view, and some of the museum collections not stored on site in the main museum, so if you want to see that, it involves travelling to our off-site store. So we encourage appointments for that. But as Dan says, people get in touch. We can help, and we can point people in the right direction often as well. Because we've got an online catalogue. It's very good, but it doesn't. It's only so good because it depends based on the information that's been put into it and the information the researcher puts in. So.
And Chris first, do you have any personal favourites from the archives yourself?
That one, I always get asked that, and it varies, to be honest. I mean, there's a lot of gems in our archive, a lot of gems in our collection. Very important for the Philatelic items. We're the only organisation to hold sheets of penny black, the world's first postage stamp. We have a complete proof sheet and 8 registration sheets of penny black in the collection. We're the only place in the world that has that. That's obviously a very important item. We have an example of basically every British postage stamp produced. We also have some really important social history items. Dean mentioned in the introduction my research interest in the Postal Service in the First World War, and I think there's a lot of really interesting documents in the archive and information in the archive about that and about the role of the Postal Service in the First World War, personal stories, personal letters, medals that were awarded to postal employees. We have
at the moment. That's sort of my favorite. Right now, obviously we're preparing for 2026, the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence and so forth. So I'm spending a lot of time figuring out exactly what we have in our collection from the colonial and the early federal period, and finding actually that we have probably not as much as we would like, but a lot more than I thought we had, and compiling a list and hoping to do a catalog of the colonial material, an illustrated catalog, and have it out in time for the anniversary. And so, yeah, I mean, it's very much for me driven by sort of research projects and what's captivating, my interest at the moment.
Fantastic. You talked about the independence issue that's coming up. Is there anything else happening in the future with the museum you want to mention?
Well, for those who've been to our museum in Washington, as I mentioned earlier, we opened in 1993. And many of our exhibits were designed to be permanent exhibits, and so particularly on the ground floor of the museum, a number of the exhibitions down there actually date to when we opened in 1993. So I would say probably over the next 3 to 5 years, a big part of what we'll be focused on is replacing some of those exhibits which are now kind of nearing the end of their lifespan. In museum, at least in the United States, in museum terms, a permanent exhibition is generally designed to have a lifespan of 20 to 30 years, rather than the 6 or 12 or 18 months of a temporary exhibit. So those galleries are coming near the end of their natural lives, and it's time to start planning the themes and stories and objects that we're going to replace them with.
Yeah, so we're giving some thought already to some refresh of some of our permanent displays, more particularly, many of you know, I'm sure, of Melrose. We talked about earlier, the Postmaster's Underground Railway. Some of the way we interpret that and display that is through a train ride with projections and interactive elements, and that sort of technology doesn't last forever. It's 5 years old now, the museum's been open for 5 years, so we're looking at renewal of some of that equipment. We're also looking at our the way we tell some of our stories, how we broaden the appeal of our collections and our stories to a wider range of people, how we look at our history and the history of the Postal Service and exploring it in different ways. Dan was talking about the US Declaration of Independence and the colonial past. We too are looking, and Dan and I have discussed it a little bit in the past, looking at what we hold on the effect and the influence of the Postal Service on the British Empire. So that's a research topic that we're beginning on. We've been working on for a little while, but we're exploring that. We're looking next year at our next temporary exhibition on uniforms. We're looking at the development and evolution of uniforms in the Postal Service, and that's going to be that is a major part of our research strand at the moment, as well as looking at some other developments that are going on.
Final question for me before we open it to the audience. If somebody wanted to become a curator, what advice would you give them? And Chris first.
Run as fast as you can. No, I think it's changing, to be honest. I mean, if you asked me, 25 years ago when I first went into museums, the standard answer then was go and get a degree in history, then go away and get a postgraduate qualification in museum studies, and then learn lots about a particular subject. That is very much, in Britain at least, and I don't know if it's the same in the States or different down, I'm sure in a moment, but in Britain that's becoming quite an outdated approach now, and what museums are trying to do is get more people in from a broader, more diverse background to really bring a different perspective on collections and not leaving it just in the hands of the specialists. And in Britain, at least, some museums, and some museums still do, have curators, as we talked about at the beginning, but also have what they call keepers. Keepers is a very antiquated term in museums now, but it's still used in some organisations, that notion of keeping the collection. And so nowadays, people are coming from a more diverse background into museums, but having an interest in a topic and a subject area is an important way. I think there's fundamentally two routes in, or two types of curator. The type of curator I am, which is a curator who came with a general knowledge, a knowledge of collections, but a general knowledge of history. Or there's those very, very specialist curators who come with a very specialist knowledge. For example, somewhere like the British Museum might have a specialist curator looking after Anglo-Saxon coins, and they've spent all their career researching Anglo-Saxon coinage, and they're an expert in that, the world's leading expert in that probably. And you know, so there are different approaches.
Gee, if I had to do it all over again and was setting out, preparing myself for the job I have now, which I wasn't doing, as I mentioned in the beginning, what would I do differently? Not a lot. I think I would keep my background in history, at least at the Smithsonian Institution, maybe because we're a national museum and fairly traditional in our approach and so forth. You still have to be a subject matter expert in the field that you're curating, however broadly that's defined. Obviously, you can't go anywhere and get a degree in philately. So, for at a philatelic collection or a postal museum, it's the closest cognate is a degree in history. If I were to do it differently, I think I would probably get a minor field or something in business administration. You know, you prepare the all the historical knowledge, how to administer a collection, but so much of, at least maybe because I'm in a government museum, I don't know, so maybe public administration or business administration, because that part of the job doesn't come easily to me. Budgets and project management and all of those sorts of things, it's we have some people who do that, but a lot of it actually falls on the curator. People underestimate maybe how much actually kind of routine administrative paperwork and budget and that sort of stuff actually falls on the curator's shoulders. So that's a skill set maybe that people don't think of when they think about preparing themselves for a career in museums, but increasingly you've got to have it.
That's very true. I mean, that's, from my experience as well, is, administration, management is a major part of my role, and I manage quite a big team, and I actually spend most of my time on business planning, budget planning, working on team plans and strategy more than I ever spend dealing with the collections.
Oh yes, and so then it gets into things like strategic planning and mission and vision and this and all this stuff, and this is all foreign to me. I had to learn all that kind of the hard way. So I wish I came in with a background in some of that stuff. Not we don't want the MBAs running the museums. I am not talking about that, but just having a working knowledge and a familiarity with some of that would have made things so much easier for me in the first 5 or 10 years.
Thank you both very much. Any questions from the audience? Raise your hand.
Exhibitions like this go when you're there to this the company shop or
No, we very much can extend our exhibitions, and we have done in the past. We used to spend a lot of time touring exhibitions around the country. We do that less now because we've got that permanent base. But we're always open to venues wanting exhibitions. When exhibitions are finished, we'd always be open to organisations taking on exhibitions. We haven't done it, say, a few years, but it certainly could be done. And if organisations are interested, we would be very, very happy to have a conversation about it.
I used to be a friend of the Postal Museum. For some reason, I suppose it wasn't supporting. Okay. Right. I used to be a friend of the Postal Museum, but that got closed down. I suppose it wasn't benefiting the museum enough, so it might have been costing too much, and there wasn't enough going back into the museum. You've got views on how the public can be involved with the museum.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, the Friends of the Postal Museum used to be a separate organisation to us, and the opening of the museum, the operation, the way it worked changed. We launched a membership scheme. We still have a membership scheme, and if I'm perfectly honest with you, it hasn't worked in the way we wanted it to work. We didn't have the right investment in it at the right times, and then things like COVID coming along has completely kind of skewed our plans on that. But we do have a membership scheme, which people are welcome to join. It's different now to the membership scheme that used to exist, in that it's more a membership scheme aimed at people who want to make regular repeat visits to the museum, rather than a scheme particularly for specialist with a specialist interest, which is what the Friends scheme used to be. So it has changed, and it is something we're looking at, continuing to think about how we can evolve that and make that. But people are very welcome to get involved in the museum. We have a number of volunteers working in the museum. We have a regular sort of program of working with communities and things. So always happy to talk to people who want to get more involved in what we do.
How do you nurture younger collectors and make them aware of Philatelic?
Daniel, do you want to answer that one? Did you hear that?
No, I can't hear the questions actually.
Right,
I can only hear Chris's response.
Right. How do you encourage younger people to collect and get an interest in Philatelic?
Oh, so right in the gallery we have a station where we have several large vats of stamps, and all visitors, adults, children, everybody, are invited to start their collection by taking 6 or 8 stamps. We have little envelopes provided, and these stamps are provided to us by stamp clubs and some dealers, and they're remainder type of material, and so everybody who wants to has the opportunity to leave the museum actually with the beginning of their collection in hand. In the U.S., there's something called the Young Philatelic Leaders Fellowship, which is run by the American Philatelic Society, and I've mentored several of those young fellows here at the museum on what they call the Curator track, and so the Postal Museum's involved in that in a lot of ways. Also, some of this went by the boards during COVID, but I'm sure we'll get back to it as things start to normalize. We had very active education department who were involved in teacher training and showing teachers how to use stamps and covers as teaching aids in school, and so exposing students to philatelic material in that way, so they at least see it, know what it is, and maybe it sparks something. But that's always the challenge. But there's no substitute for, in my case at least, with the story I related in the beginning. I suspect for everybody in the room probably, or most people in the room, it's usually a very personal connection that gets you started. It's hard to do that institutionally. It's usually an individual got you started. Somebody interested you. You saw their passion for it, their interest in it, and it was infectious and contagious, and you sort of picked up on it. The challenge of how to do that institutionally is not one we've solved yet. I think it still requires personal service.
We have a schools program. We have a very, very active and popular schools program. We have an award-winning community program as well. So we bring in a huge number. I forget the figures off the top of my head, but we have literally tens of thousands of school visitors every year through the museum, all of whom engage with the broad story of postal history across the museum.
Yes, wondering whether you could do something. It's very good to see that you've got a stall here. Could it be possible to have a kind of small display, like a room like this, with some of the stuff from the museum for people to look at, to get people more interested in actually going to see the real whole thing.
We have done in the past. We have got a very, very small display here in our stand today. We've got a display showing propaganda postmarks, slogan postmarks. We tend to do, nowadays, we tend to do that smaller display here. We've done a range of things over the years I've worked for the museum and been attending Stampex. We've done some big exhibitions here. We've had pillar boxes here. We've had postal vehicles here before now. We've done a range of things, and every time we have a think about what fits with our theme, what fits with topics that we're covering. So yeah, we've done a range of different things over different years. The difficulty often with exhibiting philatelic and museum material in a place like this is it's a very large space. The environmental controls in this space are not fantastic for displaying public record material, and to be perfectly honest, big exhibits cost a lot of money to get here. It costs a lot of money to get a pillar box here, for example, or a vehicle, because it literally has to be low loaded in and everything. So, but yeah, we've done it before, and maybe we'll do it again.
Daniel, do travelling exhibitions work
Oh,
for you?
I was going to ask the same
Oh, go on,
question.
yeah.
Dan, would you ever think about coming out to Stampex?
Yes, sure. We do it. As Chris says, it is a challenge.